we'll get it all down.
I know.
Eventually.
Every meeting's a new adventure.
I know.
Kyle, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
And I'll second.
I'm an I, yeah, oh, roll call. Always gotta remember roll call.
Mike Crum,
Yes.
Jeff Davids,
Yes.
Todd Green,
Yes.
Kyle Morgado.
Yep.
Richard Price.
Yes.
We will indicate Debbie has abstained. Motion passes.
All right, moving right along, turn it over to Kelly for a presentation of the 2022 groundwater quality monitoring results.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Morgado. I'm gonna go ahead and try to share my screen real quick. This is always a little bit tricky, but just one moment. Okay, oops, how does that look in your guys' screen?
I can make that smaller for you too. Oh, you got it? Okay, good.
Looks good.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, and you guys can see that okay on the projector? Okay, great. And by the way, we've got Jeff Davids here and Eric Johnson is our audience and in-person participation today. So thank you guys for being here. Today, we're gonna go through the 2022 groundwater quality monitoring results. And this is a relatively new program, so we're going to go through some of the basics of it, kind of where we got to, where we are here today and how we got here. We're going to look at the results, review those, have a discussion of those results, and then talk about any adjustments in terms of perhaps new sites, those types of things, and next steps. So as you know, the groundwater quality monitoring program began here in the county. We had been monitoring a specific set of stations. I think we had about 13 well sites throughout the county that we measured for the last 20 years through Chapter 33A of the Basin Management Objective Program. And we've that actual code has sunset, and we are shifting now to a more relevant program that meets the compliance factors for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so these sites and this program is really detailed in what are called the groundwater sustainability plans of the groundwater sustainability agencies who are in charge of monitoring groundwater in the subbasins here within the county and through some of our adjacent counties as well. As you know, Butte subbasin does include portions of Colusa and Glenn County, and then Vina subbasin is wholly located within Butte County as well as Wyandotte Creek. So we've continued to measure the groundwater quality sites this year since we have kind of been taking care of that for the past 20 years or so. And as you recall, we met back in July to talk about the best way to go about doing that, switching over to these new sites and what we should and shouldn't measure compared to what we used to. And so the TAC really recommended that we focus still on electrical conductivity to have that focus on measuring salinity and also temperature. And so electrical conductivity is, well, conductivity itself is the ability of water to conduct an electrical current, as dissolved ions are the conductors. And as those ions increase, salinity as well as conductivity increase. Primarily, it's the sodium and the chloride salts that you see there. So it's pretty much a good indicator of salinity or saline conditions in groundwater. Temperature is something that doesn't necessarily indicate saline waters, but it's measured. It goes hand in hand with EC measurements. And by looking at those throughout time, it really can just give us an idea if things are changing on a more broad level, as you see that. So that's why we also look at that. And why we measure saline, it's certainly not because of, we're worried about seawater intrusion. We're quite inland, but it's really the saline waters that were trapped in the pores of the rock during formation a very long time ago. So these ancient marine layers were deposited, but now they have the potential to affect beneficial users and uses due to the saline characteristics of them, if they are pulled from those lower portions of the aquifer, pumped up to the surface, and, for example, irrigated on fields. So it does pose a potential water quality risk by contaminating the groundwater from excessive pumping. And we do know, though, however, that there are areas in the county and surrounding counties that have been noted to have marine waters. So down near the Sutter Buttes, it was noted in the Butte GSP that some of those marine waters actually may move up along the fault zones near the Sutter Buttes. And we've also heard anecdotally, and now this year with some measurements actually in the field, that there are high salinity portions of the Wyandotte Creek subbasin as well. So it's worth taking a look at a little bit more to dig into that. So how exactly do we measure it? We go out annually during August. And so what we're trying to do is hit the peak portion of the irrigation season when most of that water is being pumped up from the aquifer. But we've got two different types of sites. So we have wells that do have pumps, and then we have wells that don't have pumps. So those without pumps, we're using our new equipment, which is the Solence 107. It's got 1,000-foot long tape. And so basically we can lower it down through the casing of the well and pretty much get it to, whatever depths that we want below the ground surface, let it stabilize at that depth and get a reading, which is pretty interesting because we haven't been able to do this before. And so really it's limited by either what we find in the well. As you'll see in the data, there have been some obstructions that we noticed this year. So while we were trying to get to a certain depth, we just couldn't get there. So that's really the only limitation other than the fact that it's only 1,000-foot long, but you'll see that in the data as well. So this particular piece of equipment measures electrical conductivity and temperature, and it also acts as a sounder. So it'll give you water level at the same time and make a chirping noise when you hit water. So we're able to kind of do all three at once. Now, some of the wells in the monitoring grid do have pumps on them. And for that reason, we cannot put this probe down into those wells. It's pretty expensive. If it were to get hung up on the wiring or the equipment down there, you could easily lose the gear. So, so with that, we go back to our previous, standard operating procedures. And for those with pumps, we try to really flush the water out of the well that's sitting there stagnant. And so by doing that, we open it up, we run it full force for about 20 minutes. The idea is to move all that stagnant water sitting there out of the well, and then take a sample from the water, assuming that it's sort of newish water that's come through that screened interval. And we get an electrical conductivity measurement on a sample of that water outside of the well. So this is a map of the representative monitoring sites within the 3 subbasins. Previously, we had a total of 13 sites. Now we have 8 sites per subbasin that were identified in the GSPs or the groundwater sustainability plans. As you can see, they're pretty spatially distributed throughout most of the subbasins. However, Wyandotte Creek, of course, there's always some limitations in terms of monitoring locations there in general. And so there's definitely some gaps in that one. But in general, we try to target deep wells with the purpose of this program, trying to look at, whether or not those saline waters have been pulled up through excessive pumping. However, in Wyandotte Creek, like I said, there's a lack of monitoring sites overall. So a number of the ones in Wyandotte Creek, as we discussed back in July also, they're shallow and they kind of span different depth ranges where those intervals are screened. By the way, if anyone has any questions as we go through this, feel free to just jump in, interrupt me. So going back to where the salinity is measured. So as we were talking about, there's wells that don't have pumps on them. And this diagram on the left is an indication of how we would measure that. So lowering the probe down to a specified depth. And so what we're really trying to do here, we talked about this back in July with the TAC, is that for wells that have multiple screening intervals, and that means that they're basically screened at different depths as you go down throughout the well, we lower that down and take a measurement at the midway point of the first screened interval. So for example, in this diagram, the well screened from 791 to 801. So in this particular case, we would lower that down to about 796, which is right there in the middle of that first screened interval. So if it just has the one screen interval, we would take a measurement there, because that's where the water is actually entering the well through the perforated zones. But in this case, it's got 4 different intervals. So then we would lower it down to the second one and take a measurement at the midpoint of the second screen, third screen, and fourth screen. And we do it in that order so that it's not necessarily introducing or mixing the different water coming through. So part of this was trying to see if there was any type of gradient as we went down, further down into the well. And
Hey, Kelly?
yes,
So this is for wells that are multiple screens, but one completion, not multiple completion wells that are segregated from each other.
correct. Yep. And the,
So it might be part of a multi-completion well, but you're only looking at the one that's screened deepest.
correct. Did you guys hear that? I'm not sure if you could hear it online.
No, we
No.
didn't.
Okay, yeah, Christina just added that although these might be part of a multi-completion well, we just measured the different screened intervals in one of those wells.
That have the deepest screen.
Right, have the deepest screening. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
so if you have just trying to get my mind. So if it's a multiple completion, like if one completion has multiple screened intervals, you just went to the lowest one.
We went to, so for example, if you go out to a site and it's a multi-completion well and it's got 3 individual casings within that one borehole, one
Right.
might be measuring the shallow, one might be measuring the intermediate depths, and then one might be measuring the deepest depths. We
Right,
chose the deepest of the 3 and then sampled at each midpoint of each screening interval within that one well. Does
okay,
that make sense?
yep, thank you.
Sure, no problem.
And that was helpful. And I don't know if people online can hear, but to know that even the multiple completions have multiple screens like within each completion.
Right.
So that's good to know. Is that true for all of the completions usually, or usually just the deepest that there's multiple?
It's, I don't know if could you guys hear the question online?
Yeah,
Okay, so it's tricky. So sometimes there's multiple perforations within a well, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's just a single screening. And it really depends on, what they found as they're digging through and the substrate down there and
Right.
where the highest production was. So
Okay.
another take on this too is that what you'll see sometimes is a number of smaller perforated zones that are somewhat close to each other. But instead of screening, say, the whole 50 feet, they'll do 4 different sections of, a smaller section to preserve the integrity and kind of, like a PVC pipe with that much screening isn't gonna bear as much weight, that kind of thing. So that's another consideration with that.
thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. The diagram on the right is sort of the process of what we monitor, how we monitor electrical conductivity from wells that do have pumps. And so, as I described before, we'll show up to the site and we'll turn on the faucet full speed ahead. We'll purge that thing for 20 minutes or so, get most of that standing water out of it. and then pull a few grab samples and measure EC from the purged and pumped water sample. So this is just sort of a diagram of what that looks like.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you go to wells that have a pump versus wells that don't. So when you go to wells that have a pump, have you done measurements without purging and compared those to measurements with purging? Because when you go to wells without a pump, you're basically not purging. So I wonder if the wells with the pump can give you an indication of how much mixing really goes on or doesn't go on.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that we haven't done necessarily. And I think that's just the, the standard operating procedures that we've always sort of gone along with. So rather than pulling the first sample, as we first turn it on, I think we've kind of just gone straight to the sampling after the 20 minutes of purging.
But the idea with the ones that don't have a pump, right, whether we pull a grab sample using like a hydro sleeve.
Can you hear Christina, by the way? Online, folks?
It's difficult.
Can you
Okay.
hear her? 1 second.
So with the ones that don't have a pump, whether we have in the past used a grab sample using like a hydro sleeve, right, where you drop it down into that screened interval. Your goal is to try to sample the water quality of the aquifer water, right, not what's sitting in the well. So that's why, Kelly with the probe is going down into that screened interval. Or if we were to use a hydro sleeve and grab a sample, you're going to grab it from that screened interval. Or when we have a well that's pumped, you're going to purge the well and then grab a sample. Like in all, sampling approaches, the goal is to grab what's out of the aquifer system.
But it would be interesting to see if there was a difference.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But basically, I mean, if you're pumping it out, you got to get all that water, the top water off.
Yep.
Right, Christina, that's basically up. You're purging it not to get rid of mixing, you're purging it to be pulling from the aquifer, not from what's at the top at the spigot.
Exactly.
Right. And the idea is exactly to get a representative sample of what's actually coming in through that screened zone. So, yeah.
It does vary over time sometimes. So, I mean, we had one well that it was hard to get a stable sample even like after it had been purged or
Mhm.
so weird things happen.
Yeah, question from audience.
Yeah, this is Eric.
Can you guys hear Eric online?
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm struggling with the value of this level of water quality monitoring. I'm concerned that this just is such a slight measuring tool for what you're trying to do. And I realize that the probes typically monitor salinity, temperature, and if you're lucky, dissolved oxygen. But I just can't help but think that hanging your hat on this as a groundwater quality monitoring tool is inadequate.
Have you seen other methods that you think would have more
I
weight?
guess what I'm trying to think
Yeah.
about is if this is all we're doing.
And it's not. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's important, I think, to say, right? We're not
This
looking
is a
at
piece.
we're not
We're-
looking at any
yeah.
other
Yeah.
constituents.
Oh, I
There's
see what
I was
you're
other
gonna bring up
programs.
nitrates. I was
that are
gonna bring up,
doing
are
that.
there
Sure.
constituents of potential concern in the county that we typically rub up against, say, drinking water standards for,
Right.
that we should be looking at as a screening tool for what we know in the county might be
Yeah.
questionable? I don't
That's-
know.
that's
There's
a
some
good
really
point.
low levels of metals now, copper maybe, and
Sure.
some things like that where, with just doing this, it's like, gosh, you could miss a whole lot.
No, it's a really good point. I understand your question a little bit more now. And it's probably good to go back and just review that a little bit. So, so in the groundwater sustainability plans, the GSAs really did, there's a degraded water quality sustainability indicator. And so they've identified that, but what they said was, there are a number of really good programs out there that do a great job of monitoring nitrates, looking at other constituents of water quality. And they are, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, you've got the Regional Water Quality Board, you've got a whole nitrate program dedicated towards that. And so what these GSPs really do is they say, let's let the people that do that great, we're going to rely on them, have them keep doing it. We're going to look at that data as we make our decisions to move forward to manage groundwater sustainably. But our program is going to focus on something specific to our beneficial users. And that's just going to focus on salinity. And so it's a very small kind of lane that we're staying in with the groundwater quality program with the GSPs focus. But it is looking at all those other, the GSAs are looking at all those other programs when they do their 5-year updates and pulling that information in to make that bigger sort of conclusion about how the water is doing. So it's a good point. There's a whole slew of other things that go into water quality. And this is just looking at a small slice of the pie, but it's the slice that they chose to focus on.
It's understandable, again, because
Mhm.
it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
Again, though, I wonder if this is the right tool for measuring what you're going after.
So we used to really only do the work on the right side of this diagram because our sites all had pumps in them. I think what's great about what we're doing now is that this is a really neat opportunity to be able to look at those electrical conductivity readings in place, 1,000 feet underground, which we've never really done. I've never done that before. The program in Butte County hasn't done that before. So it's kind of like going into places that we haven't seen and explored and really measured before. And this probe is really specific to being able to do that in a good way. It's pretty standard method that I think other people use as well too. So it's a good piece of equipment and it's accurate.
No, I'm not
Yeah.
arguing that. What
Okay.
I'm saying is that what's the goal with this monitoring program?
Yep.
And is this targeting the goal correctly? That's
Correct.
my question.
Yeah. So the goal of this program is to measure electrical conductivity as a conduit for salinity from year to year to see how those numbers relate to secondary maximum contaminant levels, as you will, that are dedicated or kind of outlined by the California EPA. And so we'll get into that a little bit in the next slide. But there's objectives and thresholds, as you're familiar with probably with groundwater levels. And so we're looking at each one of these wells to see how they relate to those levels that are set. And those have been established as, this is too high or this is kind of where we want to be. So yeah, but that's a good thing. And we can hash that out too during the discussion and the TAC can really weigh on that and say, that's why we're here to see, is this a good way of meeting the goals, what we're trying to do. So thanks for that. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is just what we were talking about. So in the GSPs, there are undesirable results for degraded groundwater quality, and those are gauged by comparing measurements at each one of these wells to what are known as minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And you're probably familiar with those terms by, looking at groundwater levels. But I want you to think about these a little bit differently. So instead of generally with groundwater levels, minimum thresholds are how low you want or you're accepting the groundwater levels to be. On groundwater quality, you need to flip that around and say measurable thresholds are actually the highest allowable value rather than the lowest allowable value. And so I've rearranged the graphs to kind of show that as well too, but they're based on the California secondary maximum contaminant levels. And secondary MCLs are not really related to health hazards or anything like that that you'll see with some other constituents. But these secondary MCLs are really based on aesthetic concerns. So odor, the way the water looks, the visual aspect of it. So here's a table of the subbasins and the measurable objectives and minimum thresholds that were set in each of these GSPs. So as you can see for Vina, where we want to be is 900 microsiemens per centimeter or below. And we're saying that the highest threshold that we really want to see that is 1600. So as you can see, it's a little bit of a backwards scale from groundwater levels. Now in Butte, the Butte subbasin, that group got together and decided a different set of MOs and MTs as is great, because that's the great thing about local management. Everyone can set their own levels of what they think that should be. So as you can see, it's a little bit lower. Well, it's quite a bit lower on the MT, a little bit lower on the MO for Butte subbasin. It's 700 microsiemens per centimeter for the measurable objective for Butte. And then the minimum threshold is 900 of the same units or the measured historical high, whichever is greater. And so the information on the right is just some information pulled out of the GSPs on how they really got to those numbers. So we'll kind of dig into some of the data here. Again, this is a overall map of the representative monitoring sites. The equipment that we had this year with that new probe, it's very tricky to do with one person. As you can imagine, 1,000 feet of tape is quite heavy if you're reeling it back up and trying to measure everything and keep it all together. So we really reached out to our management committee staff from the different GSAs. I've got some great volunteers, and it was great days to meet people kind of out in the field and get some more hands on deck. So it was great. I wanted to thank Jeannie Trezino from Durham Irrigation District and Christina Buck for giving us a hand out there in the field this year. So this is an overall graph of the different monitoring sites. As you can see, those are listed along the bottom axis from left to right. And then the electrical conductivity values that were seen at, Eric, you can have one of these too, if you want to look at it closer.
You can actually look at this one. I'm looking at it on digital form.
Oh, okay. But you can take this home with you too, if you'd like. Yeah, no problem. So in the future, I'll label these values as well. But as you can see, the green line shows the measurable objective. So basically all of our sites here were below that number, which is good. That's where we want to be. And as you can see in the red line at the top, that's the minimum threshold of 1600 microsiemens per centimeter. What I did was I tried to put some different markers here to indicate the different screened zone EC values. So if you only see one yellow triangle, that's because the well only had one screened zone. If you see two, that's because the particular well had two screen zones, and onwards and onwards. There's like 2 other sites that had 4 different screened zones as well. And so as you can see, also there's a note here that there's a couple wells here, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but some of those were taken slightly above the midpoint of one or more of the screen zones due to obstructions to access those depths, or because of the limits of the equipment. The tape is 1,000 feet long. And so in some cases, the screen zone was further below that and we just couldn't get to it. So we're reporting on those numbers. The one in the middle there, 28J005, that one in particular, I didn't include the data for that because it was really far off of where the screen zone was. So I believe, I'll have to check it, but it was over 300 or 400 feet difference in depth, so we decided not to include that in. But the ones that were slightly off, maybe 5 feet or so, I went ahead and included that in with this note. Okay. Just trying to wait for this to advance. Doesn't seem to want to. All right.
While we're waiting on that, Kelly, I just wanted to say, I really like the addition of the graphic with the screen interval. I just think it's,
Yeah,
when we say it in all the meetings, I think if there's a public, right, people are trying to look
Mhm.
at this and try to understand what the language we're using, I think it's just, it's helpful. I just wanted to say,
great.
I like
Thank
that.
you. Are you referring to like the graph here on the right, the figure on the right?
Yeah, that just shows like what a screen interval even is.
Right. I mean, when I was trying to think about how to convey this information in the most meaningful way, I thought, we should just draw it out so people understand and can really visualize it as well too. So I put this together as sort of a 1-pager for each site, so you can print it out, look at it. It's got a map of where each one is. And as you can see, this one's in Vina North. It's a observation type well, which is also another name for multi-completion well at some point in time. I should probably indicate which are and which are not part of multi-completion wells, but this one in particular had a value of 201, so well below our measurable objective. And as you can see, it was screened between 510 and 540, and that's what the EC value was there. For all of these two, you can see the reference point and the ground surface elevation. So what we did is we pulled the difference between the two. So say, for example, this one's about 2 feet difference. The midpoint between between 510 and 540 would be 525, but we added another couple of feet to that measurement so that it was actually hanging in the midpoint of the zone as opposed to 2 feet above it if we were doing it from the reference point. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that was all taken into account for each one of these. So I'll just go through these sites and the results. Stop me if you have any questions. This is a site off of Bennett Road in Vina North. This one is a multi-completion well that had 4 different screened intervals. And as you can see, one of the things we wanted to look at was, is there a gradient as you go deeper down into the well? This one, you could see it actually didn't change a whole lot between the first, second, and third, and actually decreased in value. And this was one in particular that we just couldn't get down to the bottom of it because of the tape limitation. This next site is a site in Vina North as well too, close to the Sacramento River. This has 2 screened intervals. Both EC values of those were below the measurable objective. And also you can see here, not a big difference in terms of change between, those specific depths.
I have a question.
Yes.
So these are really nice graphically. I agree with Kyle. I wonder, moving forward, or if you can do this moving backwards, is the historical data showing where these points match up with points in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. So in some cases, some of the wells don't have any historical data, but some of them do. And so one of the next steps that I was going to talk about later on in the discussion is for future iterations of this, doing a more deep dive and pulling some of that information out of not only the water data library, but there's also some reports that DWR has published back in 2020, and just lining it up to see, data mining, how much can we get and put on the put on these graphs as historical data. I think we'll probably, and I'd like your feedback on this too, would probably want to have some real specific symbology that's different because of the fact that the methods for capturing this data is quite different. And so whether or not it's, I mean, it should be comparable, but it's also something that's quite different. So we want to just really differentiate between the two, I think. Okay, and this next one is also from Vine and North. This is, I believe this is the well at the Patrick Ranch property. Also has 4 screened intervals, as you can see on the right. And again, not a big difference whatsoever on our EC values, but they were all under the measurable objective. This
How
next
about-
site,
I have a
Sure.
question on that last one. I know Christina knows what I'm talking about, but there's a shallower screen or actually a shallower zone from a different completion well. I'm sorry, a different piezometer in here that has really different water levels, and we always wondered if it's perched or what. What about that one? Because these are all 3 from the deep. There's other zones in this well that are from kind of intermediate and shallow and so forth.
yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that, you know, we can talk about here at these TAC meetings to see if we want to, you know, expand and, you know, expand the monitoring network basically to look and see if there's differences between these two. These sites specifically were picked and chosen because they were identified in the GSPs, but it's definitely not outside of the realm of our discussions today. So thanks.
All right.
This next site is also in the Vine and North Subbasin. Actually, I think that might be an area. I think this might be in the Vina South Subbasin area. So this is a well that's out on the University Farm. It's screened moderately deep between 735 and 760, and also a low EC value on this well. Next site is in the Durham Pence Road area. There's actually you can see this well if you drive down the road. It's a big yellow can off to the right by the custom fabrication shop. This is also relatively, it's, I would say, more of an intermediately deep well, but also came in pretty low on the EC values. This next well is also pretty low on the EC values, a shorter screen interval, pretty 520 feet deep, but coming in at 219 on those values. This is the one that always has black widows on Nelson. Yes. I have my own little nicknames for each one of these wells.
This is the Black Widow.
This is Black Widow Can, yes. So this is, we'll move into Butte Subbasin in the future too. I'm gonna do some more formatting on these maps. I know the labeling is a bit off, but due to time, I figured we could go through with these ones. So also big thanks. I had some good help from Sean Early from the Richfield Irrigation District, and Cade Porter this year from Butte Water District. And it was really helpful to have them out there pulling the weight, literally. Okay, so this is an indication of our overall results for Butte Subbasin with, again, the sites along the bottom from left to right and the EC values on the left-hand side of the graph going from 0 at the bottom up to the top of 2000. You'll see most of the sites here did come in below measurable objective, and we did have one site, the 17 North 01 West 10A001, that came in well above the minimum threshold of 900. Those values were 1921 in the first screen zone and 1916 in the second screen zone. This one in particular is in Colusa County, near the RD 1008 area. So it is near the Sutter Buttes area, and we talked about that a little bit before, about that there's known EC or known salinity that does move up through the faults in that area. But I think that this might be an area where we want to dig in a little bit more and see exactly, look into those published papers and see if there's any more detail that we can dig into. Let's see, 18L001 did have some obstructions, and so it was hundreds of feet above the screen zone that we were able to measure. So I just pulled the data out for that one, thinking that it's not very representative. I do have my raw notes here, so we can look at any of that if you're interested. And then also the last well, the 19 North Owen West 28A001M, that's a well over in Glenn County. So Glenn County staff are responsible for doing that as part of their monitoring grid, their yearly monitoring grid. But due to extreme drought conditions, they really felt like, running a hose for 20 minutes out in the open was just not a great idea, not publicly, PC or its perception. And, they have a really big issue with drought and people's wells going dry, et cetera. So they chose and opted not to measure that one this year. So we'll go through the sites a little bit more. This monitoring well is right off of Highway 162 and 99. You can see it in by those big silver, I guess they're grain silos. But this one is a 690-foot deep well, and the EC came in at 213 for this site. This next site is the one that had the elevated salinity values that we spoke about. It's over off of Gridley Road, where it takes that sharp jog to the west and to the north. It's pretty near RD 1008's shop out there, and it's 820 feet deep with a couple of screen zones, as you can see there on the right. And those values coming in pretty high there.
Just a quick comment on that one, if that's okay. That
Of course.
really stuck out. There is in the water data library, there's a 2010 report of the chemistry from that particular zone, and it also had 1868 specific conductants. It was way up there, and total dissolved solids were about 1,000 milligrams per liter, and it had dissolved metals in it as well. So there's some odd things, definitely, and it looks like the geology of it, it's in the the Ione, so it's all blue clay description, so it's much closer to the marine. It's much closer to the Great Valley group, which has the fossil water. So it definitely deserves more attention.
Okay. That's a good point too. I do have a folder here of some of the as-built and well completion reports for these, if we want to dig into any of these a little bit more. I don't think I have all of them, but we can look at specific ones at the end too, if we want to. Okay, the next site here, 13J001 is a 830-foot deep well. And the EC measurement on that came in at 250, well below the measurable objective. Let's see. The next site here is down near Pennington and Rutherford Road. It's an 833-foot well, also coming in well below the 700 EC value. That one, yeah, that one's down by Gray Lodge, actually. Okay, the next one here in Butte Subbasin, near the Calusa Highway and West Liberty area. I believe this is also an extensometer site, which is a well site that also measures land subsidence on let's say it's an hourly basis. So this well was pretty deep. almost 900 feet deep and showing a value of about 520 being pulled from the midpoint of a well screen that's screened between 816 and 836 feet. Next one here is a well that's right off of the 162. It's a little housed area. It's also an extensometer site. This was a relatively deep well, also 980 feet, pulling in a EC value of 281, well below the 700 mark of, which is the measurable objective. And now we'll move on to Wyandotte Creek. So here we had Zeke Higgins from Thermalito Water and Sewer District, and also Greg Wheeler, who's one of the landowners here, and our very own Autumn Thomas to help out with field work this year. So thanks to everyone for that. So here's the overall graph for the measurements in Wyandotte Creek. As you can see, we did have some formatting issues, but we also had a number of sites here that we weren't able to get to. Part of it was one of the sites, the 13B002, had a pump in it, contacted a landowner, and he said, well, I'm just not really, the pump's not working and I'm not going to fix it. So we really had no way to look at that one. 08M001 worked pretty closely with the landowner for quite some time. He actually pulled the well out. Or I'm sorry, he pulled the pump out after conversations with him because he was thinking about doing it anyhow. And this happened to be, you know, the thing that triggered him to do it. It was a pretty interesting site. In fact, when we went out there in the beginning, you could look down and see gases just off gassing. The surface of the water looked like it was boiling from that, which was very interesting. So we had to go out a few times and really get some good measurements because the EC as you went down, it would vary between, you know, a 2000 mark range in between, just sitting at one spot. And I think that's because it was moving and mixing and that kind of thing. But at a certain point, after it had off gas to some degree, we did get some stable readings on that one. The next three sites are the newest TSS well that was established there. So we did not include the data for that one, but we're going to get back out there next year and get measurements on that. It did have some higher values in there from the original well development records. But yeah, we'll get back out there next year and get some good data on that. And 28L001, this was a site that the consultants put into the GSP, and it's a site that we hadn't visited before. It actually got dropped from the groundwater level monitoring network back in 2005. But after a while of Google searching and finding a person to talk to, they were just not interested in participating. And so we are going to drop that one as well. And looked at our past grid and decided that, you know, we could really use the one out at Thermalito Water and Sewer District. We had a well completion report for it, and we've also got some years of data on that too, which we'll include in the next round of results. So I'll move on to here. So the first site here is a residential property. So basically running the hose for this one for 20 minutes and then pulling a grab sample. The EC was pretty low for this one, as you can see, well below the measurable objective of 900. And it's a relatively shallow depth as well too, coming in at 120 feet deep. The next site was a Cal Water site in South Oroville. This site again was pumping for over 20 minutes and then pulling a grab sample for that. This is a intermediate depth well, I would say, at 340 feet total depth. And the EC on this one came in at 344, well below the 900 mark for the measurable objective. This is the site in the Palermo area that we worked with the landowner who pulled the well, or sorry, pulled the pump and got some readings out there. So in general, every time we went out there, there were very high readings. This one in particular was pretty stable, a stable reading down at 200 feet or so. In the well completion report, it does say that there are specific screened intervals, but they overlap themselves, and it's really just a matter of the size of the mesh. So I just chose to take the midpoint of the total perforated area, and we measured it at 206. We did actually go deeper just to look at some gradients on that, but because of the fact that they didn't line up with the perforated zone, I didn't include that in those charts, but we can chat about that too, if interested. So this one, he had said that, he'd had salt in his water in this area for quite some time. There's a couple other wells that he's not able to use necessarily because of that. So I think that this is generally an area where maybe there's some type of perched salinity in these areas, but definitely needs more discussion, I think, a harder look. We do have time. Okay. The next site here is, this is the Thermalito Water and Sewer District well. And again, it's a purge sample after running it for quite some time. Relatively shallow, 196 feet total depth, and the EC came in on this one at 344, well below the 900 mark for the measurable objective. Okay, and then I know this is difficult to read. I apologize. I put this in, this isn't in the packet that's online, but this is an indication of temperatures also. I realized that we didn't really address that. So I put this together. What you'll see is each subbasin, and you'll see the sites going from left to right. And then where applicable, the values for the temperatures are going to be going from top to bottom, from first screen zone to fourth screen zone. You probably have to modify this a little bit because, as you can see, some of the sites in Wyandotte Creek don't really have a screened zone. So I'll have to modify this eventually for the final product to indicate that, maybe by just a note, something like that. But generally what we saw is that, as you get closer to the mantle, you get warmer temperatures. So as you go farther down into the well, we saw some slight increases. But generally, I would say in Wyandotte Creek, colder conditions and some pretty warm conditions, I would say, that was surprising to me, at least. So with the piece of equipment too, there's some stabilization that's required. So if you drop a degree between the first sample and the next sample, you just have to let it stabilize for about 30 seconds. So we held to that and ran a timer and everything for that. So with that, I think we can just go ahead and move into discussions, any adjustments. We could talk about those with the high EC levels, see if there's any additional monitoring that you think would be good. And I'll also just let you know that in process between now and probably March of next year, I'll be just developing and drafting up the monitoring step-by-step protocol. So just sort of the how-to, what we do and how we do it, then the field manual, and then probably report these results using the same format that we used years past with groundwater quality. So, graphs, and like you said, Todd, adding those historical values in there also with different notation. And I'm assuming, well, my plan is to include this as an attachment to the annual groundwater status report that'll be presented to the Board of Supervisors in the spring. And so that report is basically, if you're not, well, it's been a while, so overall conditions. So it'll synthesize all three annual reports for each subbasin and kind of look at overall conditions for Butte County, including the water quality and those three conditions from, like I said, the sub-basin annual reports. But then we're also going to have a discussion on drought impacts for this last year as well too. And then I'm assuming that this memo will also be just a good slide in as an attachment for any of the 5-year updates that the GSAs also put together, and they can use it for that purpose also. So with that, I will open it up to the TAC and see if you guys want to chat about anything in particular.
Good job. I don't have any questions. Like I said, I like the new graphic. I think it just helps for public. You know, sometimes we can forget that what we're saying is not always can be followed if somebody from the public wanted to pull a presentation or a report. So I like that. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Kelly, this is Debbie. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Hi. Is the plan going forward to only like plot that year's worth of data, or are we going to keep adding to it so that you have some trend component to this graphic?
Yeah, good question. I assume that we want to look at those trends over time. So not only going forward, we would add that to the graphs, but also pull in any historic data that we do after a bit of data mining for that.
Okay, perfect. Is there a trend component to your SMCs for water quality, or is it just those trigger levels?
It's just those trigger levels.
That's a great question, though. I mean, I think that's one of that would be better, right?
It would, yeah. For excuse me, for the ones where the water quality was really,
Mhm.
It didn't raise any red flags. You could do a lot of damage before you hit that threshold. So, and not be able to turn it around. So I would think that at some point, at some level, discussions and management actions associated with increasing trend might also be worth discussion.
Like a rate of change alarm is what we'd call it in hydro, right?
Don't
Mhm.
you think that would be part of the 5-year updates though, the analysis of the review? Is that part of the requirements for the 5-year update?
Debbie?
Did you hear
I
me,
did.
Debbie?
I did. You were asking if that was part of the 5-year update?
Yeah, requirements just for water quality and or everything else.
Yes-ish, I guess. I'm just thinking on a more technical. I mean, if you haven't hit the thresholds, I'm like, okay, so now I'm on the spot in a public meeting setting about what the requirements for the 5-year updates really are supposed to be and what are really required. So yeah, you know what? Ideally, that would exactly be what was included in a 5-year update. How's that?
That sounds great.
Okay.
I think what might be useful on some of these sites, so for example, the ones that are pretty deep, like the one in Vina that's I think close to 900 feet deep, but that we could only get down to, I think we could only get down to somewhere around 300. I think it might be something that we look at either using TSS, which is the DWR's Technical Support Services Program. They provide funding for projects, or through the Sigma implementation grant projects, maybe some video logging of these particular wells to see what those obstructions are and see if we can, break through them. Maybe it's some geochemistry that's, causing some calcifications and solidification down there. But, rather than dropping it necessarily, because it's a pretty deep well. It's perforated between 740 and 800 with a total well depth of 948. So it's unfortunate that we could only get down to 300 feet down, but it might be worth, putting some energy into that well rather than just moving on and picking a new site, I think. I'm just wondering if you guys have any feedback on that. Okay.
Kelly, remind me again which well that is? Sorry.
Sure, this is the one in Chico, the rental house.
Yep, okay, yeah, on
West Sac.
West Sac,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm. Yep.
How big is the casing?
Off the top of my head, it's just one of those smaller PVC pipes.
Okay.
That we go down. I think that's the case. It
Okay,
might be a little bit, it might be more of a 8 to 10 inch or 8 or 12.
oh, okay,
Oh, yeah. It would
Um,
depend, we have cameras for, sorry, Debbie, for, we do, our drain inspections for spillways, but you need to have some room to get them in is the issue. But so 8 or 10 is plenty. But if it's an 1.5 inch pipe, you're gonna have trouble getting a nice camera down there. That's gonna
Yeah.
be needed.
yeah, that's exactly where I was going. But we could definitely, I can talk with April and we can try to coordinate that and see if we can figure out a time to be able to, see if it's possible to video it with the equipment that we have and potentially give that a try.
Okay, great. Okay, any other comments or discussion points? I think you had a question over here, Eric.
Well, I was just gonna say that it seems like the water quality results that you have for that well don't indicate a whole lot of hope for obstructions that are of a chemical nature. That it's a lot more likely that the casing is collapsed or the screen's broken and sand has come into the well than it is that there's nodes or something down there that could be broken through. Just looking at the general quality of the water,
Right.
it's not likely that precipitation is causing that blockage.
Okay.
You'd have to have a lot lower quality water to expect to see that.
Yeah, I wonder too if there's anyone here with more of a geochemistry background. I know that I've heard anecdotally that there are some wells that do have these, calcification type growths that accumulate on the screens that you can go through and actually do well development and use chemical treatments or, hard mechanical wire brush to clean those out to create a higher producing well. I know that they do that.
Metal casings. C casings don't really like vigorous scrubbing.
Sure.
'Cause they
Well,
fail.
the screen itself is metal, right?
I don't know.
I think that's,
Sometimes.
yeah,
Steel.
Depends.
Yeah,
You have to
depends.
look at
Not in the multi-completion.
the
okay,
completion report.
yeah.
They
I
don't
guess we have to
respond
check
very
that.
well to physical.
Mhm.
cleaning.
Just also for the record there, as we did go down in that one, we were in it ranged from, 582 to 632 in that particular well, although it was well above the screen zone. So there are some higher elevation, higher EC values, I guess, in that one that it would be worth, I think, looking into.
Kelly, do you anticipate for perhaps like wells like this where there might be some issues or items that need clarification of coming up with some options or recommendations or next steps that we may want to consider? Do you in a written format so we all know? or
Yeah, I think
plan
so,
for?
based on, our discussions here today. And so, if no one's opposed to that idea, I think, and I'm not hearing that anyone here in the TAC is, I think that could be one of those bullet points is like further investigate this one in particular. Another one might be you know, in order to bring some of our sites up to par, you know, 18L001 from Butte and also 28A001. I'm assuming that, you know, 28A001, this is the one in Glenn County that wasn't measured due to the drought. You know, I don't know if that's going to be an ongoing MO, so to speak, if we, and when we do have future droughts. So we may want to consider, you know, either doing the same thing with 18L001 or having sort of a, you know, looking into an alternative site potentially, so that we do have the full gamut of the 8 sites per sub-basin.
And again, you didn't measure those because of the perceived perception of wasting water?
So that was a decision by Glenn County staff.
Quick question, are those, do they have pumps in them?
So yes, on the last one, which is A001, it does have a pump. And then 18L001 does not. I believe that one is a multi-completion well.
Yeah, I'm curious what the TAC thinks about that, like,
Could you
it seems like it could be pretty important to gather data, especially in drought years.
I mean, that seems a little bit silly, or at least ultra conservative, to eliminate that from the monitoring program based on perceived public perception.
Well, you have to think it's Glenn County, which is in a little different situation than we are.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, if there is pushback, then at least get the measurement without purging. So you have something.
Yeah,
Put the
what do
purge
you- I mean,
water in a bucket and use it to water something, and then
Yeah.
It's
So
not
there's
wasting.
nothing around that you could water.
Pump it into a.
I mean, we spoke about this. It's
Yeah.
at a residential property. It's just still, that was
Bring
the
a buffalo
decision.
and pump it into the buffalo and
Yeah.
go use it somewhere.
I mean, we can certainly suggest that to Glenn County staff and see if that's something that they'd be willing to do in the future. It's a little bit outside of my hands specifically, but yeah. So we could offer those suggestions rather than maybe finding a new one necessarily.
Or do a combination of both, at least just an alternative site.
Yeah.
Could
But
you
Add another site?
That's
That's
what
what
it's
we're-
above the 8 and leave that one in there, and if they're willing to do it, great. If not, we have one in Butte County that we have more control over.
That's a good point. What were you gonna say, Kyle?
I was just gonna say, you know, it's just a conversation about the importance of the continuity in data for reporting, right? We know that there is maybe a small political, or issue or visual issue of it, but, a discontinuity in some of the worst years in data for groundwater could be more damaging than helpful, right? You do more damage just by not having good data during one of these dry years than
Right.
having an asterisk in there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I'm just gonna look at, just so that you guys have a sense of this. Let's see. So this is actually an irrigation well that is 140 feet deep, screened between 120 and 140. So it's actually relatively shallow compared to all the other sites. All the other sites are range between 680 and 894 feet deep in the Butte
Even-
subbasin.
Even purging a well of that shallow depth isn't that much water, right? I mean, that's even less water to purge. I mean, maybe we can refine like the 20 minutes, right? If you're doing a 900-foot well for 20 minutes, that's a much different volume of water you're trying to purge than a 130-foot well. So if
And
we
it
do
depends on the, yeah,
I'm just saying if just to try to get something out of there.
Mhm.
If 5 minutes does the effective same turnover in that well, then maybe we could think of the methodology, to the volume of water that we're purging in that respect, instead of just a set timeline. I'm just throwing stuff out to be helpful, try to get a measurement.
But
Yeah.
on the other hand, if it's only 150 feet deep, does that well belong in this
Right, that's it, yeah.
monitoring network?
Yeah. It seems like an outlier in that.
But I think that kind of gets back to maybe Eric, almost your question at the beginning in terms of what's the objective? And I think if we zoom out, and again, I wasn't here, when everything happened in the 90s and all that, but I'm guessing that what this comes from is that there's a base of fresh water down there, from these old, marine deposits. And what the concern was is upwelling of that, saline water from over pumping or pumping that would draw that up. So does that particular well help to answer that question? Probably not. You probably need a deeper well that would detect that way before.
Mhm.
But, and I think kind of tying off of that concept, I mean, one proxy for how stressed the aquifer is around these wells would be like some sort of a drawdown measure, from where the water level typically is. So what I'm wondering is if we might want to look at EC and the relationship to EC when, given a drawdown for the well, basically. So when you pump on these wells harder, do you see an increase in EC? When you see that water level dropping, do you see the EC going up? Because that, to me, would help to answer that question, right, that we're getting at, is when you're stressing the aquifer, do you see that saline water coming up?
That's a great point. That's a huge point, because one of the folks on the phone was talking about how they'd like to see this over time so that we could see ramp trending and have time to react to it. And I guess that brought up the question in my mind of what is the county willing to do as far as reaction to in the event that you see perceived quality issues getting worse. It would certainly be good to be able to say, we believe that the reduced water quality in this well is due to pumping, and we have water level measurements to point us in that direction. I don't know what you county would be willing to do, whether they'd say, the water quality around here is getting really hard, we got to cut back on use, and specifically people X, Y, and Z need to reduce their pumping by a certain amount. You got to have some information to back that up.
But that made me think too, it might be interesting to somehow in these graphics and plotting of the results to also indicate depth to water measurements, since we do take that at the same time. And then at some point in the future, we can compare wet years to dry years and see how that changes. I think that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, no, I think those two data sets that are collecting concurrently, are really important to look at in terms of how they co-vary with each other. So
Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree. And especially if there was some sort of, because you're repeating these, well, I had a couple other questions. So is this twice a year that you're taking these measurements, or is it just in the fall?
It's actually once in August,
So just in August, once a year?
Yes.
At kind of that peak.
irrigation
And again,
season.
that's kind of the idea would be to capture that
Mhm.
most sensitive time potentially in terms of the most stresses occur on the systems.
Exactly.
Okay. And maybe there's a delay, to kind of get to Debbie's point, there's groundwater is the greatest Titanic there ever was, meaning that it's usually by the time you realize that it's too late, it's too late.
It's hard
Or
to,
by the time you realize the problem,
redirect.
it's too late to
Yeah.
steer in a different direction, but.
Mhm.
Okay, and then how many of the RMS wells for each of the subbasins? These are a subset of those wells, is that right? Or the-
actually, each GSP, each subbasin has dedicated specific specific RMS wells just for water quality. And
Okay.
so for example, in the Butte subbasin, there might be some that also function as groundwater level RMS
But it's not-
wells.
But it's not always both.
It's not always both. And in fact, in other subbasins, some of the groundwater quality wells just are not groundwater level measurement RMS wells at all.
At all.
So,
Okay.
I mean, we could do a table of showing that or somehow indicate that in this as well, but I don't, you know, if we get the groundwater level measurement at the same time, I'm not sure how helpful it would be, but I'm happy. I can put that together, no problem.
At this point though, are they all, they might not be RMS wells, but are they all monitoring wells? There's a distinction there too.
So there's the broad monitoring network and then there's the RMS wells.
Yeah.
So that's a
Right.
good point.
I mean, you don't have to, if you don't know.
I would say no, actually, because I don't think the extensometer sites in Butte subbasin are part of that groundwater level monitoring. The other ones, I believe, are in Butte. Wyandotte Creek's a little bit of a mixed bag because there's just some new ones and some old ones. But in general, I would say yes, those are all pretty much line up. And then in Vina, you see, maybe you're still seeing that one.
I think you stopped. Did you stop sharing the screen?
No,
I'm
it's,
just pulling other things, but yeah, I think in Vina,
we
those
just
are
have a
all
well report up
part of the
right now.
monitoring network for groundwater levels, yes.
Okay. Okay, and then just to, I think you mentioned something about, and I think I mentioned, was it the 90s when this monitoring started? Was it, so we have about 20 plus years at some of these wells in terms of EC, or is it, what's kind of the time series that we have roughly?
So I would say for these wells, there's really only one in Wyandotte Creek, which is the Thermalito Water and Sewer District well that had the Butte County 19 or 20 year groundwater quality measurements available for that. The other ones are mixed bags. So some of them have historic data from water data library and or DWR monitoring in the past. So we can dig through and kind of see, you know, what each one of these are future endeavors, but
So those are generally like random dates, like
So
2 or
it's
3
this like
measurements that would be.
annual
It's not
fall
annual.
thing, or late summer, it's
as
not.
new.
And so this is just like the first year
Yes.
that really in response to the
GSPs.
GSP development. Okay, got it. I had missed that. So we're gonna have to do some scavenging
A little
to put
bit,
together
yeah.
the time series, but,
Right.
and it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Creating a new
yeah.
baseline, really.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, so we're at the
This-
very beginning. of that.
This is the kind of the transfer, right? When we had to figure out, we're no longer, what was the old program?
The
Christina?
Basin Management Objective Program, the BMO
Yeah.
program.
Yeah, the BMO program to this, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of what we were discussing last year. So yeah, this is the new baseline.
Yes.
So any more questions? We have 30 minutes left in that.
I have a couple questions.
Did you say you have a couple questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions, Kyle.
Okay,
One
go ahead.
was, so in the cases, there were just a couple of cases, I think, where the tape, you know, our tape is 1,000 feet and the screen interval was like 120, for example. Does the TAC think that we should just not take a measurement down there and stick to the 1 or 2 or 3 intervals above that? Or should we go down to 999 and take a measurement there?
You said 120, you mean 1,200 feet?
Shoot, 1,021.
So
Is what she
1,000.
meant.
Oh,
Yeah.
So it's like 20 feet away from what, you know, like at what point should we record data or not record data if we can't reach it? Does that make sense?
I mean, my sense is that the deepest measurement is the most important. And even though it's not precisely in the perforated interval, I'd say it's put an asterisk by it, but take it. You know, that would be my
Mhm.
sense.
I agree with,
Kind of what we did.
Yeah, that's what you did, yeah.
Mhm.
And do it the same every time.
yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
don't do 920 one year, 999 one year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's helpful. And then, one of the things that we had talked about going into this, and now Kelly's done it, so on the backside, you know, where you have 3 or 4 screened intervals within that completion, we had debated about whether we take one measurement at the deepest screen interval or take them, you know, at each screen interval. What do you think now that you've seen, just 1 year of data? Do we continue to, pull a measurement at each individual screen's interval, or just go down to the deepest, or any thoughts on that?
I feel like just the deepest, but I mean, having all the data is always nice also, you know. Because you might see the conductivity moving down or something. I mean, you know, you see something strange, right, happening if the saline is coming from a different level. It's gonna eventually get down to the bottom, right? But I don't know. I'd hate to disregard
Using the
data.
I'm not using the probe. Yeah, so one
It's
of
so
the, it's so easy,
Once
exactly.
you're there, it's so easy.
Exactly, yeah.
Might as well do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question, just in terms of the impact on time. 'cause
And that
data
was
is
our
cheap,
question
it's
going
just
in, right? So that was kind of a follow-up question, right? It's pretty quick
I mean,
Yeah.
if you,
once you're down there.
the worst thing about it is, you know, waiting the 30 seconds per every degree, you know, so it's really, you know, if you have 1 versus 4 to do, I mean, it's gonna maybe add another 10 minutes total.
Because you have to
So-
go to the bottom anyways, you might as well take the measurements on the way there.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay, just wanted to swing around some of those things we talked about before. And then last question, so on the one, there was 2, I think, or so that are really high already, right? This one, 1900, but yeah, this is Butte. Yeah, okay, so this one, that's 1900. It seems to me like you said, Jeff described really well what the goal of this particular program is, right? The base of fresh water, and is that changing essentially? So you could argue that you're already beyond the base of fresh water there. We should go higher. We should
Yeah.
move up, right? So maybe is that the case? That I think that's a multi-completion well. Is there an option to measure a shallower completion? If there is, would you also recommend continuing to measure the steepest one? Like do the deepest one and the next deepest? Or what are TAC thoughts about that one?
Do we have, those are great questions, Christina. Do we have a sense on what the salinity levels are, like say if you go down 100 feet below the base of fresh water? And I know it's kind of this imaginary line, right? It's not like it's this thing.
Yeah.
But do we have a sense of how high it gets? 'Cause I think that would inform what, you know, if it's, for example, 10,000 or something, then maybe that well would continue to change if there was ongoing upwelling. But if it's around 2,000 or 3,000, then maybe it kind of changes and then stays relatively steady. But I'm always of the opinion of more data, the better. So I think going up and doing the next completion above would be really informative, it seems like, but yeah.
Well, so there are more completions than what showed on the right side?
Yes,
Oh, because of,
In the borehole.
in the borehole itself, yes.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it would be nice if we're gonna go off of like what Jeff was saying, it'd be nice to know where the base of where the line is. I don't know, is there a protocol, like if it's this high, like take a measurement coming back up every 100 feet until you try to get an idea where this.
So I have a comment on that. So while we were talking, I pulled up Stephen Springhorn's master's thesis in the Sutter Buttes area, and he actually has a cross section that goes just a few miles away from where we're talking about. And he actually has a base of fresh water at about 1,200 feet below ground. So this is theoretically, this is 500 feet above the base of fresh water where it was mapped, which makes it even more of an anomaly. And there's there's also a what he's got on here is called a DWR Meyer well that goes down to 1,000 feet. And I wonder if that can be used to further characterize how anomalous or not this measurement is. So anyway, I think it's it's not only going shallower, but maybe there's this other DWR well that goes deeper to say maybe it gets fresher as you go deeper until you get that imaginary line.
Like some perched layer, like this would be some perched.
Right. Yeah. It's so anyway, it has been mapped around here, the base of fresh water, and it is Like I said, it's the 1100, it's the 1150, about 1250 below ground feet.
Is there, do we have older? I mean, this is just one pointed data point, right?
We do, there's a, from that point, there was a 2010 report, and it shows very similar numbers, I was saying, in the Sigma data library. It's got, the specific conductance was 1868, so it's pretty close to what that 1916 is.
Mhm.
And the, so yeah, and it's talking about a TDS of 1,000. So it's, so there's one data point, it looks like, that I could find on the water quality of that.
Hey, Todd, what was Stephen's source of data for his base of fresh water?
Yeah, he has a whole chapter on that. I can, it's been a while since I read it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we did a lot of work and he may have piggybacked off of that.
Uh-huh,
And it was historical gas and oil wells. So,
right.
you know, it's a great, I think it's a really interesting thing from a regional point of view, but I suspect it'll probably fall short in some areas where we have, you know, some unusual geology driving that, which you would definitely consider the Sutter Buttes to be, because the Sutter Buttes pushed up through those marine sediments. So you have marine sediments at the surface on the Sutter Buttes. Plus we have buried domes going west. So I mean, I think honestly, there are 4 completions for that well. I think that there are a handful of wells down there, and it would be interesting and worthy to measure in all of them.
Mhm.
Because
you can
there is shallow saline water perched, you know, has been documented in the Colusa County area. So we don't have a good handle on, you know, the aerial extent of that, but you know, this is not going to be evaluating this trend in that area is not going to be as simple as upwelling deep saline water that's sitting there because of, you know, it's sitting deep because of saline deposits and because of the density of the water is greater. You know, they're going to be much shallower here, and groundwater flow in here is going to make it much more complicated. So I think more data points in here is better.
Quick question also. So this is I just pulled up the as-built for this particular set of multi-completion wells. So you can see the different screened intervals. And we can certainly look at the EC values and temperature at each one of these. I also wonder if, you know, this is almost similar to what we're seeing over in the Wyandotte Creek well, where, you know, it's out by itself and it's this pretty elevated EC value of, you know, 3,300. But we do know that area anecdotally has had, you know, these perched saltwater areas. We do or do not know. I mean, it's anecdotal, so you're not completely sure. But I wonder too, if what you guys think about an approach to say, okay, look at that well, and then look at some sort of, you know, circle radius, a buffer around that particular well, and see if there's any wells close to that, you know, maybe it's a half a mile away or within a mile, and see if we can find any others that also have deep screened intervals, or, you know, from this discussion, shallower intermediate, and, you know, kind of expand the search, I guess, to see, you know, how far this pocket of saline water extends or doesn't, you know, almost a mapping of it of sorts. But I'm not sure exactly how that would fall into, you know, GSP monitoring and regulation and compliance, and, you know, it's a whole nother project. But just in terms of, you know, the TAC recommendation on this, if that's something.
Another multi-completion well south, almost directly south of that one. So that one's at the 1004 yard.
Mhm.
And there's 17 north, 1 west, 27A, 1 through 3. That's, I don't know, maybe a couple of miles directly south.
Okay.
So closer to the domes, closer to the buttes. And it's got three, like I said, 3 completions.
Well, you
Coosa
said
County.
17?
17 north, 01 west, 27A.
Okay, so that's gonna be like 6 or plus miles, but yeah, and because
Is it really that far? Sorry, it doesn't seem like that far when I'm driving, but
I know. 'cause
it might be.
Well,
It is a long road in there.
But the other thing I wanted to point out about that, if you can bring back up your image there of the as-built.
Okay, hold on one second.
And I know we're getting into the details here of one well, and probably boring some people here, but there is a lot of attention to this. I remember somebody bringing this up before, is that when you look at that screened interval, and is this for 17 or is this for 19?
This is,
Is this
Uh,
17 north?
Yeah.
this is, yes, 17
Oh, so
north.
you don't have the as-built for the 19 north.
The one in Wyandotte Creek?
Yeah, click on the other tab on the PDF. Is that the other tab is?
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wait, no, you're right. Anyway, 17.
That's the
Yes.
Glenn County WCR. This is the one that we were talking about with the 1921 EC level.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's the 17. So yeah, if you look at, and by the way, Debbie, you were right. It is only a couple miles. I mean,
Turned around and checked it, Todd, just to make sure, but I wasn't going to say anything.
no, you were right. I was somehow, for some reason, I was in the, yeah, we're much closer. So it's 17. Okay, I was in the 19. But anyway, regardless, if you look at the interval that sample came from, there's a big coarse grain, poorly graded, well sorted sand with gravels, and it's got lots of volcanic material that looks very channelized, in other words. And I bet it would be relatively easy to map, and it's in this history where lots of volcanism was going on in the Sierra, this is before Sutter Buttes. So and a lot of these channels were coming down off of the Sierra, creating these really really nice sandy intervals. And I wonder if this is stratigraphically related to this channel system, interpreted channel system, at around 800 or so. The oil and gas, there's a ton of a ton of gas wells in this area too that can help with that. So it looks like interesting geologic project.
Yeah.
All right, we got about 14 minutes. Anything else for the tack on this one? Do we want to, anything we want to direct or see what we want to do, or trying to see where the saline line is on this, or go check some other wells? Any feedback? I think it would be nice to know where this runs out. I don't know, to come back out, to have some kind of method to just describe these high, because again, I think going back to what Eric was said, like what are we trying to do is know if there's a change, right? So if we're just going down and burying the probe in this every time, then we're not going to know really if there's some change in this area. So should we take the higher measurements? I meant like elevation, not high, just to describe this well, that's such an outlier a little bit better. If that makes sense. Anybody?
Yeah, I think more data, the better.
Yeah, I don't know how robust this is, but I'll just throw it out there. I'm guessing it's not. But I mean, one thing you could do is if you're over those thresholds, either the minimum threshold or the measurable objective, you could potentially, just pull and again, it's been mixed because you dropped the sensor down there, but you could pull the sensor up until you hit those different thresholds and just indicate at what levels those are at. At least if you do that consistently, that you have some data about the vertical stratification of,
Yeah.
you know, of what that looks like in there.
It's a good idea.
That's my
Oh, hang on.
recommendation.
Circling back to that, I'm not sure I understand how that provides
Mm.
data about the groundwater quality.
Well, exactly, and that's why I think I couched it by that this maybe dubious, you know, methodology, but yeah, I don't know. Because certainly that could just be the, you know, what's happening in the casing if it's not perforated, so it's just the density settling out, right?
Yeah, okay, there we go. That was my first picture when I was trying to picture what you were talking about was, oh, you're just gonna have, you know, it would be interesting to see, but it doesn't really relate directly to what the groundwater quality is doing because it isn't pulling in any water except for what's actually in that bottom screen. But on that topic, we do have a handful of multi-completion wells, both going north and east from there. So, you know, we could, so like looking at Kelly, that the ag well,
Mhm.
we have a multi-completion north of that and south of that that might be interesting to add.
You're talking about Butte sub-basin again.
Yep.
And you're talking about the one in Colusa County that we're talking about?
Yes. Yeah. So if you pop the map back up where that, I think the 19 North one was,
Uh-huh.
that you weren't able to get a water quality sample. I think that was, is that right?
Let me pull it up. real
Or
quick.
am I might be confusing them, but it looked to me like it was located, yeah, east of Butte City. So 19 North, 1 West, 28.
Oh, you're saying 35L.
No, go north, go straight up.
That one.
Yeah, right there. So we have, if you go north of that,
Uh-huh.
you know, a couple of miles, and south of that, a couple of miles are 2 other multi-completion wells.
Oh, I see. So north and south of Red 27, there's other Glenn County multi-completion wells.
Yep.
That we could potentially even suggest swapping as an RMS site.
Yeah.
Depending on data results.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know if you want the numbers or not, or if you're gonna go find them, but I can give you the state well
Sure,
numbers for those
well,
two.
you got them.
Okay, sure.
I'm a
Yes.
quick writer.
So the one to the north is 19 North, 1 West, 22D.
Thank you.
And it's 4 through 7, I think, are the sequence numbers. And the one
Okay.
to the south is 18 North, 1 West, 2E, 1 through 3, I think.
Thank you.
And Debbie, I think it seems like you have all these wells memorized, so I'm gonna ask you a difficult question.
Oh,
Do
well,
you know
I'm
what-
just gonna fully admit that I'm actually looking at the Sigma data viewer right now. So,
No,
I mean,
but
I know that they're there, but I wanted to click, make sure I was remembering them in the right location. So no, not all in my head.
Well, it's very impressive regardless, but do you know basically what the deepest completion screening is, you know, just in round numbers?
Yes, let's look and see. Okay, so for the one that's to the south, the deepest screened interval looks like about 720 to 730. If the notes, what we put in the note category is correct. And then the one to the north of that, the one that's on the north side, so 19 North, 1 West, 22D, the deepest one is 780 to 790.
Yeah, so that seems like those would be really handy to have.
I think so, and they go like, you know, 780 to 790, 520 to 530, 340 to 350, and 80 to 90. So
yeah,
you get a good vertical snapshot too that way.
Might I add that I'd recommend adding 2, but not swapping out without a really good reason, because it just, the perception is not so good.
But one of my questions, is this is always about threshold. What do we just report it? I mean, I think the other ones will inform what's happening here, but we can't, this, the best way to get one that's out of threshold is find one that's under it. It probably isn't the best way to do it, right? So we want to, that's why I would like to understand the extent. And I think getting other wells involved would do that. And then we're going to have to continue to, report on this well.
Yeah, and I think at that point with the GSP 5-year updates, there would be a pretty strong narrative about the results that have been found in these areas, and, more of a description of an understanding of why. And then at that point, DWR takes a look at it and, makes a decision about whether or not that makes sense, or if we need to do something else.
Perfect. All right. Anything else on the presentation or the water quality monitoring?
I guess just real quick too, I would ask if you guys also think, looking at other wells in the area of 18 North, 04 East, 08, M001, which is the one that had the elevated EC levels of about 3,300 in the Wyandotte Creek Soap Basin. If you think that that's also a good recommendation to look for other wells in the area and just try to get some more online that give us a better indication.
I would say
what's going
yes.
on.
If we're doing it one spot, should do it in the other.
Well, that would be part of the protocol too, that you're drafting, right? I
Yep.
mean, it's just essentially. it should be the
Yeah.
same.
I think, but this would be sort of a recommendation to the GSA, and then the GSA says, yes, we're okay with adding another one, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, in that protocol, the protocol, I think, is more of like a field manual, like here's exactly what to do in the field. But also it could include, if these conditions occur, go to step 2, which is,
You're talking about a
But-
response plan.
yeah, basically. Mhm. Exactly.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right, moving on to number 5, departmental updates, drought activities and updates.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just give you a quick update right now. We have been working, geez, the last time we met with you guys was July. We've had a number of phone calls and outreach with a number of people in the county who have had their domestic wells impacted by the drought conditions. So I think between Autumn and I, we've probably reached out and spoken to about 200 people since the last part of June. So when they call, we talk to them about the issues with their well. We talk to them about resources and solutions, but it's also a really good opportunity to talk to them about how to find their well completion reports and how to find groundwater levels in their neighborhoods, and a number of other things, resources and contractors to be able to come out and look at their well, et cetera. So we've been working with a lot of people that way. We're also providing them with links to specific resources. So Butte County Office of Emergency Management has a water hauling program for those that have above ground storage tanks. They also have a storage tank program, which is now underway, providing these above ground potable water storage tanks to folks that don't have them, and then the water filling services with that. So there's about 78 people or so in Butte County that signed up for the tank program, and about 200 overall that have signed up for, the water hauling portion of that as well, for total 200. So that's continuing to go and roll out through that office. We've updated our website that has a lot of really good resources also for those that are interested in financial resources for well repair, drilling new wells, that type of thing. There's a couple of programs out there for people. But if anyone has any questions about anything drought related, they can contact me directly at 530-552-3588. Other than that, I will pass it over to either Cami or Christina for Sigma updates.
I was gonna say that Christina could probably give an update on the grant application. It's probably the best.
Sure. So yeah, the main activity, can you hear me online okay? No. The main activity that we've been doing lately in all three subbasins, Butte, Wyandotte Creek, and Vina, is getting ourselves organized to submit an application for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program through DWR. It's both planning and implementation money, but all subbasins are eligible, so highly competitive. Long story short, the Vina GSA boards, both Rock Creek and Vina GSA, met last week and did give direction on the list of projects to be included in the grant application. It's about $5.5 million, and it's a mix of monitoring, GSP planning activities like annual reports and 5-year update, and some of those compliance activities, anticipating that we'll need to respond to the DWR comments and do some updates to the GSP, as well as kind of feasibility and initial design on water supply opportunities in the subbasin, bringing in additional surface water supplies, irrigation efficiency, and then extend orchard replacement program, which is looking at the opportunity to reduce demand through kind of delaying your replacement of orchards if you're going to pull one out anyway. So that's the Vina package. Wyandotte Creek GSA board met on Thursday, and they also gave direction on their package of projects. I think there's about 5 projects there. Similarly, monitoring, asks for new monitoring wells, the GSP compliance and reporting activities. Thermalito Water and Sewer District has a project that expands their treatment capacity and therefore would reduce their groundwater pumping. And then there's a recharge project. There's also an initial investigation for recharge in Vina. And what's the 5th one? I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, that's the 5. So that's Wyandotte Creek. And then Butte Subbasin, as you know, has 11 GSAs. And so there it's a little bit different because a lot of their projects are district projects related to their surface water supplies and really keeping those reliable and functioning for the benefit of groundwater sustainability. And so that group is continuing to work through a package of projects that I think right now is at about $10 million. At the top of the list is also GSP activities and monitoring. And then other district projects. The Butte Advisory Board meets this week, so I encourage you to check that out. I think it's on Wednesday if you're interested in the details of what's being considered for the Butte subbasin.
There's a Zoom option for that too. You don't have to attend in person.
Yeah, hybrid meeting. So it's really, we're on the implementation road, and this is the first step in that direction of really, these GSAs giving direction on what their priorities are, at least for this grant funding. In Vina and Wyandotte Creek, we'll be beginning a long-term financing study in January or so. And so that conversation will continue in terms of, what grant money is not going to support, how that's going to be funded going forward.
That's it with the funding. We're working on finalizing a scope of work and contract with a preferred consultant for that, but their start date would be essentially the day after the Board of Supervisors approves that contract in December.
Thank you. Any questions for Christina on Sigma? All right, Butte County Annual Water Status Report.
Okay, yeah, this is me. We are working forward on a annual groundwater status report again, as we do every year. We just, the GSA's just signed up for a contract with Ludorf and Scalamini and David's Engineering partnering to do annual groundwater status reports for each of the 3 subbasins. And so those will be, like we talked about earlier, folded in as attachments to the overall Butte County groundwater status report. So that'll include an assessment of kind of overall conditions along with this water quality information and an impact on how the droughts really affected Butte County and its residents this year. And so we're expecting that work to get done between now and March when it goes to the Board of Supervisors for their review. So I assume that we will bring that forward to you guys also to take a look at before that time, and we will get something on the books for that. That's it. Oh, we can't hear you, Kyle. Sorry.
You're
You're
on mute.
muted.
Did you guys get that? Any questions for Kelly? All right. Number 6, TAC members wishing to address items not listed on the agenda. I do not have any. Jeff?
Nothing from my side here.
I do like the hair, though. I can see it on the camera.
Thank you, guys.
Eric
Yeah, I
has a
have
question.
one. I live on a small farm in Durham. And I'm surrounded by almond orchards. And I'm very interested in this issue of irrigation and efficiency. I go out and walk the dog and ride my bike around and kind of pay attention to how the farmers in my area are irrigating. And I haven't seen one change since I started doing this. And in particular, I see irrigating in the middle of the hot day, using spray irrigation, and the lack of any kind of ground cover to help with the carbon content of soil, to help with the water retaining conditions of the soil. So in my mind, I'm seeing agricultural practices that don't appear to be changing due to the drought. And so I'm wondering about outreach. I'm wondering about Butte County's reaction to this, and if there are considerations about, increasing education, even a potential carrot stick approach to, better irrigation practices to help reduce use.
Do you want
Jeff, you want to speak to
to?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to do it. You guys can go first, but yeah, one of the so I guess that would be in the southern part of the Vina subbasin. And one of the projects or components that's going to be submitted to DWR for a possible funding for consideration is irrigation efficiency project. And basically it's a big component of it is outreach. But also another component is a scientific inquiry into, what are the practices that really do have the biggest change in consumptive use. Because I think what's really important, Eric, with your question is that, if there's practices that could be done that would reduce the amount of evaporation or transpiration without impacting yield, those are the ones you want to do, because the plant still has to use the water, but if we can reduce the non-beneficial evaporation, for example, from irrigating a certain time of day, those are the things that we want to look at. Cover crops is a really hot topic right now in terms of their water impacts. There's actually the Secretary Ross is from the California Department of Agriculture is actually convening an expert consultation on the 30th of November to talk about what is the impact in water stressed areas of cover crops, and does it really help in terms of soil retention of moisture, or does it hurt because they actually transpire water as well, or is it kind of depend on where you're at? So these are all really important conversations. I'm very glad you brought them up and it's on your radar, and hopefully we'll get some money to just try to answer some of them in the coming years.
I think the only thing I would add is just in terms of, their response to drought. I think in terms of ag water use, it's just something that has to happen on a longer time frame. So from a sustainability perspective, we have to tackle that overall with droughts planned for, rather than responding to kind of extreme droughts in the moment.
Yeah, and my concern is that if it's done over time, I mean, I rely on a well for my water supply. If all my neighbors are using an abundance of water and my well goes dry, it's too late.
Right. And
That's the whole job of the GSA, is hopefully, right, is to be able to get a plan and foresee that. There's a whole other water efficiency issue too, right? Because it's also, people want to use all the water, or, being more efficient also just means you're using all the water that's applied, and that could be to grow more crops, right, also. So
Right.
the efficiency of water in the groundwater cycle is even more complicated than just watering more efficiently. That doesn't necessarily mean your total consumptive use of what's coming and going is calculated that way also, right? So I think it's a deeper issue that I think the whole state has to come to grips with on, because perennial crops always have to be watered, right? Or you're gonna lose those crops. So then you get into a whole nother agricultural conversation with farmers and practices of what they're wanting.
Yeah, I realize that. My question is about the low-lying fruit that they could still operate and still produce crops, but improve their irrigation efficiency so that everybody wins.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some work done on what is the appropriate amount of watering that is acceptable for certain crops, and be able to apply that to a per acre use. I would guess that UC Davis might be a great approach to that, to be able to say, well, if I have X amount of acres of almonds, how much water should I be using and how should I be applying it to be the most effective and still get my almonds?
Yeah, still get your yield. Yeah.
Still get my yield, and I'd really like to see that was plugged into what we're doing on an advisory basis.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, the Chico State Farm would be kind of a showcase, basically, of kind of, what the best management practices are for, orchard cultivation. They also have row crops there as well. But there's ways we can measure, even using satellites, the actual consumption of water from crops. So we can have we can have a conversation after this to put some balance on that understanding for the. But yeah, no, you're right.
Any TAC members have any questions or any agenda items? Online? Debbie? Mike? Putting a call out there. Todd? Everybody good? Public comment, anything out there? I think anybody online?
No one has their hand raised online. It's also just TAC members online.
Sweet. And then the public, I think with Eric, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was Eric.
Awesome. Else? Future meeting? You guys want to discuss a good date for everybody for spring?
Actually, if we could get back to you when we know a little bit more about the draft report being available and when that
Okay.
would be, that might be better. Unless there's any dates that you guys know now that don't work for you in the spring, that would be good to know.
Nope.
Okay. Thanks.
Just get through the holidays alive and with some dollar amount in the bank account above zero. It's the plan. So that's all I have. So I'll adjourn the meeting, and I appreciate it. And sorry we ran over a little bit, but some great discussion, and I appreciate everybody. And good seeing everybody. I missed July's meeting, so I good seeing everybody again. And happy retirement to whoever's retiring.
Yeah, I was wondering the same
We
thing.
don't know. Nobody
Well,
here.
Autumn's right behind it, so.
I know.
Guys.
Surprise, I won the lotto Powerball. Yeah.
So, that's all I have. I have to get off and go jump on another meeting through my day. So I appreciate everybody, and we'll look forward to the invite for the calendar for the next meeting.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank
Kyle.
you.
Take care.